And so, in effect, what is happening is I'm closing the gap between what I want and kind of what God intends for the universe, the intention for the universe that is written into the way the universe works. As that gap closes, you will cease to experience a discontinuity between internal and external events. The mind and the outside world start to become one seamless medium that is not differentiated without collapsing your sense of identity. That is, you will begin to have the sense that you are within the world and within yourself at the same time, and that is actually the same thing. Because you will begin to sense that you are that which is behind the world in which you live. Not the world as a generalized phenomenon, let's say, but the world which you inhabit. You begin to encounter it as you would your own image in a mirror. And you will look at it and you'll sense that it's you on the other side of it. And that is what happens when the animosity between self and not self is ended. And at that point, when you're experiencing the world in that way, you can begin to talk about spinal tunneling as something I am doing. But until then, it's always kind of something other that is happening to you. I don't want to see my spiritual life and my material life as that separate, because I consider it an inescapable fact that if something is wrong in my physical life, something must be wrong in my spiritual life, and vice versa. And I don't want to unsee that. I don't want to remove that. That's been a very useful axiom over the years. I don't want to dispense with it at all. And so this is why I much prefer the kind of psychological language that Jung used, because it doesn't force you to make this separation between the spiritual and the physical. That was one of the great innovations of his, I think, that he allowed you to overlap these two things and just perceive one reality. And so I'll tend to talk about the collective unconscious and the psychoid and the unconscious. And I psychologize the spiritual in a way not to negate its spirituality, but to negate the separation between the spiritual and the physical. Because that's what that does. That terminology doesn't have the same baggage that the traditional language does. And so whenever there's a clash between the physical and the spiritual in somebody's life, I tend to consider that like a linguistic phenomenon. That is a consequence of imbibing suggestions implicit in the spiritual language that force you to separate these things that ought not to be separated. When you're reading text that's structured that way, and you're like conforming your mind to the way that that's structured, it's going to engender a kind of synesthetic response.